At my wife's late dad's will reading, my wife looked proud. Your time at the company has come to an end. I'm replacing you with my lover, her lover said. That's right, sweetheart. Her mother smiled. He doesn't deserve a cent. The lawyer opened my letter, scanned it, then laughed hard. He said quietly, "Oh, this is good." They looked terrified. Look, I'm not saying I walked into that room expecting confetti and champagne, but I also didn't expect to feel like I was attending my own funeral while still breathing. The air in there was thick, like someone had sprayed an entire bottle of my late father-in-law's vintage cologne mixed with the kind of entitlement you can practically taste on your tongue, bitter and metallic. I planted myself on one of those velvet chairs that cost more than my first car, the kind that looks like it belongs in a museum but feels like sitting on a bag of rocks wrapped in fancy fabric. My ass was already numb, and we hadn't even started yet. Across from me, my wife Olivia stood by the mahogany table like she was posing for a portrait titled, "Woman Who Just Won Everything." Her chin was up, shoulders back, and she had this glow about her, not the kind you get from happiness or love, but the kind that comes from knowing you're about to cash in big time. She looked like she'd swallowed a trophy and was waiting for someone to take her picture. I'd seen that look before, usually right before she told me about some charity gala she'd planned without asking me, or when she'd rearranged our entire living room because the feng shui was off. Today, though, that look had a different flavor. It tasted like victory, and I wasn't on the winning team. Next to her stood Ryan, yeah, that Ryan, the one who'd been consulting for the family business for the past 6 months, the one who showed up at family dinners uninvited, the one who had opinions about everything from market strategy to the temperature of the damn soup. He was wearing a suit that screamed, "I bought this at a discount outlet but I'm pretending it's Italian." And he stood there like a human exclamation point, all puffed up and ready to punctuate whatever statement Olivia was about to make. His hand kept brushing against hers, casual and proprietary, like he'd already moved in and changed the locks. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too tight for that kind of honesty. Then there was Evelyn, Olivia's mother, the woman who'd perfected the art of smiling while simultaneously letting you know you were beneath her. She sat in the corner like a queen who never had to worry about losing her throne, her pearls probably worth more than my entire education. Her smile was the kind you practice in front of a mirror until it looks natural, the kind that says, "I'm being polite," but means, "I'm measuring you for a coffin." She'd been giving me that smile for 8 years, ever since I married into this circus, but today it had an extra layer of satisfaction. Today, she knew something I didn't. Or at least, she thought she did. The lawyer, Mr. Grant, sat at the head of the table like a referee at a boxing match nobody wanted to watch. He was one of those old money types, the kind who probably had a collection of rare whiskeys and used words like, henceforth, in casual conversation. He cleared his throat, twice, adjusted his reading glasses, and reached for the sealed envelope that contained Edwin Hale's last will and testament. Edwin, my father-in-law, the man who'd actually liked me once upon a time, back when I was useful and hopeful and hadn't yet figured out that marrying his daughter meant signing up for a lifetime of being the family's emotional punching bag. Mr. Grant broke the seal with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for opening ancient tombs, and I half expected dust to pour out. He unfolded the document, scanned the first few lines with his lawyer eyes, and then looked up at us. I tried to breathe quietly, tried to make myself small, tried to be the kind of person who didn't take up too much space or ask too many questions. I'd gotten good at that over the years. Real good. Olivia leaned toward Ryan, and I watched her lips move in a whisper that wasn't nearly as quiet as she thought it was. "This means his stake at the company is over," she said, and the words landed in my chest like a brick thrown through a window. Ryan's smirk was immediate, the kind that shows too many teeth and not enough soul. "That's right, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough to make sure I knew exactly where I stood in this little production. Evelyn chimed in with her perfectly modulated voice, the one she used for estate planning and casual cruelty. "He doesn't deserve a cent." My mouth made a smile. I'm not proud of it, but it did. My face betrayed me by being polite, by being the good husband, by being the guy who doesn't make scenes or flip tables or tell everyone to go straight to hell. But inside? Inside I was a kettle on a hot stove, the pressure building, the whistle getting ready to blow so loud the neighbors 3 houses down would hear it. I'd come to this room for closure, maybe even a little bit of dignity, a final goodbye to the man who'd once looked at me like I mattered. They'd come for celebration, for the dividing of spoils, for the official confirmation that I was out and they were in. Mr. Grant finished reading the will. Property here, donations there, the company assets divided in ways that made Olivia's eyes light up like Christmas morning. She squeezed Ryan's hand. Evelyn nodded like a satisfied cat. And then Mr. Grant did something I didn't expect. He set the will aside, folded it with deliberate care, and reached for another envelope. This one had my name on it. Well, not my name exactly, but it was from me. My letter. The one I'd written 3 weeks ago, when I finally stopped pretending I didn't know what was happening, when I stopped being the family doormat, and started being something else entirely. He unfolded it, his eyes moving across the words I'd chosen so carefully, and then, of all the things that could have happened in that stuffy, perfume-soaked room, he laughed. Not a polite chuckle or a nervous giggle, but a real, genuine laugh. The kind that comes from your belly and means you've just read something that surprised the hell out of you. Oh, he said quietly, but in that silence, that single syllable filled the entire space like someone had turned up the volume on reality. Then he looked up. His eyes found Olivia first, then Ryan, then Evelyn. And I watched, God, I watched with the kind of satisfaction that probably makes you a bad person but feels so damn good, as the color drained from Olivia's face. Her perfect posture crumbled. Ryan's smirk disappeared like someone had erased it with a dirty rag. Evelyn's pearls actually trembled, which I didn't even know was possible. That laugh? That beautiful, unexpected lawyer from Oxford laugh? That was the moment everything went very, very wrong for them. And very, very right for me. I sat there in my uncomfortable velvet chair, my ass still numb, my mouth still making that polite smile, and I thought about all the times they'd underestimated me, all the times they'd talked over me and around me and through me like I was furniture. I thought about how they'd planned my exit, scripted my humiliation, and counted their money before they'd even earned it. And I thought about how sometimes, just sometimes, the quiet guy in the corner is the one you should have been watching all along. 8 years ago, I married into a family that came with more rules than a country club and more pretension than a French restaurant where the waiter judges you for not knowing which fork to use. It was June, the kind of perfect summer day that makes you believe in fairy tales and happy endings, and I was stupid enough to think that marrying Olivia Hale meant I was joining a family instead of auditioning for a role I'd never quite nail. The wedding was at some estate in the Hamptons with more square footage than my hometown, and everyone kept telling me how lucky I was. Lucky. Like I'd won the lottery instead of signing up for a lifetime subscription to a magazine called You're Not Good Enough Monthly. The Hale family business, Hale and Son Developments, was the kind of company that got mentioned in business journals and at charity galas where people wore tuxedos to eat tiny portions of food that cost more than my monthly rent used to. The name was on letterhead, on buildings downtown, and yeah, it was even on our wedding cake in elegant gold script because apparently nothing says eternal love like corporate branding. Edwin Hale, Olivia's father, ran the whole operation with the kind of charm that made you forget he was probably ruthless as hell in the boardroom. He had these sharp blue eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and when he shook my hand at family dinners, he'd lean in and say things like, "Marcus, you're the only one here with any common sense," or, "These people would run this company into the ground without someone like you keeping the wheels on." I ate that up like free samples at Costco. I believed him. More than that, I worked my ass off to prove he was right about me. While Olivia attended luncheons and Evelyn planned charity events that were really just excuses to show off, I was in the trenches doing the actual work that kept Hale and Son from collapsing under the weight of its own self-importance. Operations, logistics, scheduling, the boring, Unglamorous stuff that nobody wants to talk about at cocktail parties, but that actually matters when you're trying to run a multi-million-dollar development company. I coordinated with contractors, managed timelines, dealt with permits and zoning boards and all the bureaucratic nightmares that come with building things in a city where everyone has an opinion and a lawyer. Edwin used to wink at me during board meetings when someone would propose something spectacularly stupid. It was our secret language, that wink. It meant, "You and me, kid, we're the only sane ones here." It meant I belong. It meant I mattered. Looking back now, I wonder if he knew what would happen after he was gone, if he saw the sharks circling and figured I was smart enough to swim to shore on my own. Or maybe he just liked having someone around who didn't kiss his ass every 5 minutes. But then Edwin died. Heart attack, quick and clean, the way men like him always seem to go, like even death knows better than to drag it out, and everything changed faster than I could process. One day I was the guy Edwin winked at, the secret ally, the son-in-law who understood how things actually worked. The next day I was the guy people talked around, the name that got left off meeting invites, the opinion that didn't get asked for anymore. Olivia started speaking for me at family gatherings, finishing my sentences before I could start them, explaining what I meant when I hadn't said anything at all. "Marcus thinks this," she'd say, or, "Marcus agrees with me." And I'd stand there like a ventriloquist dummy wondering when the hell I'd given her permission to be my translator. Evelyn got worse too, which I didn't think was possible. She started correcting me in public, little jabs disguised as helpful suggestions. "Marcus, that tie doesn't quite work with that suit," she'd say at a company function, loud enough for everyone to hear. Or, "Marcus, you might want to reconsider that approach, it's a bit outdated." She said outdated, the way other people say contagious disease. Every correction was a small erasure, a reminder that I was tolerated, not celebrated, and that my membership in this family came with an expiration date printed in invisible ink. And then Ryan showed up. Ryan with his helpful suggestions, and his fresh perspective, and his annoying habit of standing too close to my wife at company events. He materialized about 6 months after Edwin's funeral, introduced as a marketing consultant who was going to help modernize the brand. Nobody asked me what I thought about that. Nobody asked me anything anymore. Ryan walked into meetings with ideas that ranged from mediocre to catastrophically stupid, and everyone nodded along like he was Steve Jobs risen from the grave. He'd say things like, "We need to pivot our demographic targeting," and Evelyn would practically applaud. Meanwhile, I'd mentioned that we had 3 projects behind schedule and desperately needed to renegotiate our supplier contracts, and the response would be a polite smile and a subject change. They were eroding me, slowly and methodically, like water wearing down a stone. And they were polite about it. That was the thing that made it worse. If they'd been openly hostile, I could have fought back, could have called them out, could have walked away with my dignity intact. But they used politeness like a weapon, coding every insult and concern, every dismissal and gentle suggestion. "We're just worried about you, Marcus," Olivia would say when I questioned why I wasn't included in a major client meeting. "You seem tired lately. Maybe you should take some time off." Translation: "We're cutting you out, and we're going to smile while we do it." The company that Edwin built, the one I'd poured 8 years of my life into, was being repainted without me in the picture. They called it modernization, and rebranding, and moving forward. But what they really meant was erasing everything that reminds us of the old guard, especially you. They brought in new consultants who never built anything in their lives but knew all the buzzwords. They redesigned the logo, changed the mission statement, talked about disrupting the development space, like we were a tech startup instead of a construction company. And through it all, I was expected to smile and nod and pretend I didn't notice that my name was being quietly removed from every document, every presentation, every conversation about the future. I became a ghost in my own professional life. I'd walk into the office, the one I'd worked out of for nearly a decade, and people would look surprised to see me, like I was the mailman showing up on a Sunday. My assistant got reassigned. My projects got handed off to other managers without explanation. My office, which used to be on the 4th floor with a decent view of the city, got moved to a smaller space on the 2nd floor that looked out onto an alley where the garbage trucks came at 6 in the morning. Every indignity was delivered with an apologetic shrug and an excuse about restructuring or optimizing workflow. The worst part? I let it happen. I smiled through the erosion because that's what you do when you've been trained to be grateful for the scraps, when you've been told your whole marriage that you're lucky to be here, lucky to have this job, lucky to be part of this family. I swallowed my pride like bad medicine and convinced myself it would get better, that once the transition period was over, things would stabilize. I was the frog in the pot, and they were slowly turning up the heat, betting I wouldn't notice until I was already cooked. But here's the thing about being underestimated: eventually, you start paying attention. And once you start paying attention, you see everything. Here's what nobody tells you about being cheated on: your brain becomes a detective you never hired. It starts collecting evidence without your permission, filing away little inconsistencies in a mental folder labeled things that don't add up but you're too scared to open. A normal person might see a lipstick stain on a collar and think, "Huh, that's weird." Me? I went through an entire mental gymnastics routine that would have scored a perfect 10 at the Olympics. The dry cleaner must have mixed up the shirts, I told myself. Or maybe Olivia kissed me goodbye and I didn't notice. Or perhaps lipstick just spontaneously generates on fabric now. Who the hell knows? Stranger things have happened. The thing about denial is that it's comfortable. It's a warm blanket you wrap around yourself when the truth is standing outside your door with a sledgehammer. So when Olivia started having more client lunches than actual clients, I nodded along like a dashboard bobblehead. When she came home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine, something expensive and woody that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce, I convinced myself it was the new air freshener at whatever restaurant she'd been to. When her phone started spending more time face down on tables than face up, when she started stepping into the other room to take calls, when she suddenly needed to work late, at an office where she didn't actually have a job, I constructed elaborate explanations that would make a conspiracy theorist proud. But the evidence kept piling up like dirty laundry, and eventually even my Olympic-level denial couldn't keep up. There were the receipts from boutique shops I'd never heard of, tucked into her purse like secrets she'd forgotten to hide. Designer dresses that never made an appearance at home, jewelry I never saw her wear, lingerie that definitely wasn't purchased with me in mind unless my wife had suddenly developed amnesia about my favorite color. When I asked about the charges on our credit card, because she was buying gifts for her affair on our joint account, which is either balsa or stupid or both, she'd wave her hand dismissively and say something about marketing samples, or charity auction items. Marketing samples. As if Victoria's Secret was just handing out free merchandise to random rich ladies for promotional purposes. The business stuff was harder to ignore because it was documented, black and white, impossible to explain away with creative fiction. I started noticing things getting moved around in the office, files disappearing from my desk, passwords getting changed without notification, meetings scheduled without me that I'd only hear about afterward through whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. It felt like being slowly edited out of a movie, like someone was going through the footage and cutting me out frame by frame, hoping nobody would notice the continuity errors. One afternoon, it was a Tuesday, I remember because Tuesdays were when the cleaning crew came through and emptied the trash cans, I found a printed email thread crumpled up in the wastebasket next to my desk. Not my trash can, mind you. This was in the executive office, the one that used to be Edwin's and was now apparently a communal space for people plotting my demise. I probably should have left it there, should have walked away and maintained my plausible deniability, but curiosity is a bitch, and I was already halfway to suspicious, so I smoothed out the paper and read it. The email was from Evelyn to Ryan, CCING Olivia, with a subject line that read Phase 2 Implementation. Phase 2. Like they were launching a military operation instead of running a construction company. The contents were even better. Evelyn had outlined a succession plan that involved streamlining leadership, and removing redundant positions. And there, in bullet point number 3, like a knife wrapped in corporate jargon, was the line: remove Marcus from daily ops, transition to advisory role, non-voting. They'd even put a timeline on my professional execution, Q2, which meant they'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. I stood there in that office, holding that crumpled email, and felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't anger exactly, not yet. It was more like clarity, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I'd been stumbling around in for years. They weren't just excluding me from meetings or moving my office or reassigning my projects. They were actively plotting to remove me from the company I'd helped build, and they were discussing it in emails like I was a broken piece of equipment that needed to be disposed of efficiently. I took a picture of that email with my phone. Then I smoothed it out, folded it carefully, and put it back in the trash can exactly where I'd found it. Then I went back to my shitty second-floor office and started looking at everything differently. The cancelled meetings weren't scheduling conflicts anymore. They were deliberate exclusions. The ledger books that got closed when I walked past Evelyn's desk weren't just confidential company business. They were evidence of something I wasn't supposed to see. The napkin I'd found in Olivia's car with an address written on it, some apartment building downtown that neither of us had any reason to visit, wasn't just a random note. It was a breadcrumb leading somewhere I probably didn't want to go but needed to anyway. I became an archaeologist of my own life, digging through the layers of bullshit to find the truth underneath. I started paying attention to the small stuff, the way Ryan's hand would linger on Olivia's lower back when they thought nobody was watching, the way they'd exchange glances across the conference room table like they were sharing a private joke, the way Evelyn would smile at them both with the satisfied expression of a matchmaker who'd successfully paired off two people who deserved each other. I noticed that Ryan had started parking in the executive lot, in the spot that used to be reserved for senior management. I noticed that his consulting contract had been extended 3 times without any clear deliverables or measurable results. I noticed that the projects he supposedly oversaw were actually being managed by other people while he took credit in meetings I wasn't invited to. The financial irregularities were harder to spot because I'd been systematically locked out of most of the company's books, but I caught glimpses here and there. An invoice for a vendor I'd never heard of. A budget line item labeled Strategic Initiatives that didn't correspond to any actual initiative I knew about. Transfer receipts that moved money from operational accounts to something called Hale Family Trust, which sounded official but also suspiciously vague. When I asked Evelyn about it, casually, like I was just curious, not like I was building a case, she'd smiled that practiced smile and said, "Oh, that's just estate planning, Marcus. Nothing you need to worry your head about. Nothing you need to worry your head about." Like I was a child who couldn't understand grown-up business. Like I hadn't spent 8 years keeping this company from falling apart through sheer force of spreadsheets and competence. When Evelyn announced at a family dinner that they'd decided to hire Ryan as a permanent consultant for the company rebrand, I smiled like the good husband I'd been trained to be. I raised my glass when they toasted to fresh perspectives and new beginnings. I nodded when Olivia squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture that used to mean, "We're in this together," but now clearly meant, "Shut up and play along." And then I went home, opened my laptop, and started a document titled Evidence. I wrote down every inconsistency, every suspicious meeting, every unexplained expense, every lie that had been delivered with a smile and a pat on the head. They thought their plan was clever, thought they were pulling off some sophisticated corporate coup that I was too dumb or too distracted to notice. What they didn't realize was that I'd been paying attention the whole time, collecting their mistakes like trading cards, waiting for the right moment to lay them all out on the table and watch their smug faces crumble. Amateur hour, I thought, saving the document and backing it up to 3 different locations. This is what happens when rich people think being born into money makes them smart. There's a special kind of irony that only life can deliver, the kind where you find yourself at a memorial gala celebrating family loyalty, while watching your wife grind on her lover like they're auditioning for a reality show nobody asked for. Edwin's memorial. Because apparently when rich people die, They don't just get funerals, they get galas with open bars and silent auctions, was held at the Grandview Hotel, one of those old money establishments where the carpet probably costs more per square foot than most people's houses. The invitation had said, "An evening honoring Edwin Hale's legacy of family and dedication," which in hindsight might be the most unintentionally hilarious thing ever printed on embossed cardstock. I showed up in my best suit, the navy one that Olivia used to say made me look distinguished before she decided I was just furniture with a pulse. The ballroom was packed with business associates, old family friends, and enough fake sympathy to fill a swimming pool. Everyone kept approaching me with those practiced concerned faces, the ones that say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," while their eyes say, "I wonder if there's shrimp at the buffet." Evelyn held court near the stage, wearing black Chanel and grief-like matching accessories, accepting condolences from people who probably couldn't stand Edwin when he was alive but showed up anyway because that's what you do when networking opportunities wear mourning clothes. I grabbed a scotch from the bar, expensive stuff that burns smooth instead of rough, and positioned myself near one of those decorative columns that rich people love, the kind that serves no structural purpose but makes you feel like you're in a museum. From there, I had a perfect view of the dance floor, which is where Olivia and Ryan decided to perform their little show. Now, I'm no expert on appropriate memorial behavior, but I'm pretty sure dancing like you're celebrating winning the lottery doesn't make the list of acceptable activities when supposedly mourning your dead father. But there they were, pressed together like two pieces of expensive garbage, moving to some slow jazz number that was supposed to be tasteful and dignified. Olivia wore red. Bright, fire engine, look at me red. To her father's memorial. Her mother's event celebrating family loyalty. She wore a dress that probably cost what I used to make in a month back before I married into this circus, and she moved against Ryan like they were the only two people in the room. His hand was on her hip, possessive, casual, the way you touch something that belongs to you. Her head tilted back when she laughed at something he whispered, and the sound carried across the ballroom like wind chimes made of entitlement. I watched people notice. Watched them exchange glances, those knowing looks that said they all knew something I was supposed to be too stupid to figure out. Evelyn gave a speech around 9 o'clock, standing at the podium like she was accepting an Oscar for Best Performance as a grieving widow. She talked about Edwin's vision, his dedication to family, his belief in passing the torch to fresh leadership. That phrase, fresh leadership, she delivered it while looking directly at Ryan, who stood near the front looking like he'd just been crowned king of something. "Edwin would be so proud," Evelyn said, her voice catching in that practiced way that signals emotion without actually requiring any. "To see the family business in such capable, modern hands." Modern. That was code for. Not Marcus. Capable. That was code for. Anyone but Marcus. I took another drink and watched the room applaud her performance. Around 10:30, I decided to make myself useful by clearing some abandoned plates from a side table, because apparently that's what happens when you stop being family and start being the help. I was stacking champagne flutes when I heard Ryan's voice coming from behind a partially closed door near the service hallway. He was talking to someone, Greg maybe, one of the board members who had the personality of wet cardboard but voted however Evelyn told him to. I probably should have walked away. Should have minded my business and maintained my ignorance. But that ship had sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk to the bottom of the ocean, so I moved closer and listened. "Once the wood gets processed, it's basically a done deal," Ryan was saying, and I could hear the smile in his voice, the kind of smug satisfaction that comes from counting chickens before they're even eggs. "Olivia becomes president, I take over marketing and business development, and we start implementing the real changes Edwin was too old-fashioned to make." He paused, probably taking a drink, probably adjusting his cheap tie. "First order of business is getting Marcus out. Can't have dead weight dragging down the new vision." Dead weight. I stood there behind that door, holding a stack of dirty plates, and processed the fact that my wife's lover had just referred to me as dead weight at my father-in-law's memorial gala. The audacity was almost impressive, like watching someone juggle chainsaws while standing on a unicycle. You know it's going to end badly, but you can't look away. What about severance? Greg asked, because even wet cardboard occasionally pretends to have ethics. He's been with the company for 8 years. Ryan laughed. Actually laughed. Evelyn's handling that. Bare minimum, non-disclosure agreement, gone by end of quarter. We've already got his replacement lined up. Guy from Chicago with actual credentials, not just some charity case who married into the family. He said charity case, like he was describing a stray dog someone had taken pity on, not a human being who'd spent almost a decade keeping their company from imploding. Marcus never understood the scope of what we're building here. He's small time, small thinking. Honestly, we're doing him a favor. Guy can go find some middle management position somewhere and stop pretending he belongs in our world. Our world. Like he'd been born into it instead of sleeping his way into the family 6 months ago. Like his cheap suit and cheaper ethics somehow gave him more claim to the company than the guy who actually knew how the business worked. Greg mumbled something I couldn't hear, probably agreeing because that's what Greg did, agree with whoever was in the room. Ryan kept talking, naming budgets I'd never seen, mentioning vendors I'd never heard of, describing projects that apparently existed in some parallel universe where I didn't run operations. He talked about expanding into overseas markets, partnering with development firms in Dubai and Singapore, investments that would require the kind of capital you don't get from legitimate construction work. He name-dropped shell companies and offshore accounts with the casualness of someone discussing the weather, and I stood there thinking about how this asshole was either spectacularly stupid or spectacularly confident, and neither option was particularly comforting. The beauty of it, Ryan continued, and I could practically hear him leaning back, getting comfortable in his explanation, is that Marcus won't see it coming. Guy's been sleepwalking through his own life for years. By the time he figures out what's happening, we'll have everything locked down tight. Evelyn's already moving assets into the family trusts, I've got the board votes secured, and Olivia. He laughed again, that slimy, satisfied sound. Olivia is just happy to finally be with someone who matches her ambition. I set the plates down carefully on a nearby service cart because my hands had started shaking and breaking expensive china seemed like a bad idea when I was still pretending to be civilized. I stood there for another minute, listening to Ryan and Greg discuss my professional execution like they were planning a vacation, detailing every step of how they'd dismantle my life while I smiled and nodded and played the role of the oblivious husband. Then I walked away. Didn't confront them, didn't make a scene, didn't flip over the table or punch anyone in their smug face, though God knows I wanted to. Instead, I went to the bar, ordered another scotch, and told the bartender I wasn't feeling well. Which wasn't a lie. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach by reality. I stumbled a little on my way out, performed a passable impression of a drunk person so people would remember seeing me leave early, sad and pathetic and too wasted to drive. But I wasn't drunk. My head was clearer than it had been in months, maybe years. I drove home in absolute silence, no radio, no music, just the sound of my thoughts reorganizing themselves into something that looked a lot like a plan. And when I got home to our empty house, Olivia was still at the gala, probably dancing with Ryan, probably planning her new life without me. I went straight to my office, pulled out my laptop, and started doing what I should have done months ago. I started collecting receipts, backing up files, taking screenshots, organizing evidence, building a case with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that boring, small-time, deadweight guys like me are apparently really good at. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were playing checkers, and I was about to introduce them to chess. The thing about people who think they're smarter than everyone else is that they get lazy. They make mistakes because they're too busy congratulating themselves on their brilliance to notice they've left the back door wide open. And Hale and Son Developments had a back door the size of a goddamn garage, and I had the keys, literally and figuratively, because once upon a time, when Edwin was alive and I was still considered human, they trusted me with administrative access to everything. The company's server lived in a storage closet on the 3rd floor, wedged between boxes of old promotional materials and a filing cabinet that probably hadn't been opened since the 90s. It sat there humming quietly, this beige box that contained every digital secret the company had, completely unguarded except for password protection that Edwin had set up back when he thought family meant something. I remembered him joking about his passwords at a Christmas party years ago, back when he'd had too much eggnog and was feeling nostalgic. "I use birthdays and dog names," he'd said, laughing. "Can't remember anything more complicated. Getting old as hell, Marcus. Never get old." "I got old anyway, Edwin. Sorry about that." It was a Thursday night, around 11, when I went back to the office. The building was empty except for the night security guard. Phil, a retired cop who spent most of his shift watching baseball highlights and eating sandwiches his wife packed for him. I waved at him on my way in, made some excuse about forgetting paperwork, and he barely looked up from his phone. Phil didn't care. Phil was 3 years from retirement, and had long ago stopped giving a shit about who came and went as long as they had a keycard. I took the stairs instead of the elevator because elevators ding and make noise and attract attention, and I was trying to be invisible. The third floor was dark except for the emergency exit signs that cast everything in that creepy red glow you see in horror movies right before someone gets murdered. I found the storage closet, used my key, which still worked, because nobody had thought to revoke my access after demoting me, another sign of amateur hour, and stared at the server like it was a treasure chest full of gold. Edwin's birthday. That was the first password I tried for the admin account. Too obvious, but worth a shot. Denied. His anniversary with Evelyn? Also denied. Then I remembered the dog, some golden retriever named Biscuit that Edwin had loved more than most people. I typed in, "Biscuit 1987, because that was the year he'd gotten the dog, according to a photo I'd seen in his office, and boom. Access granted. The desktop loaded up with folders and files and enough digital paperwork to keep an accountant busy for 6 months. I started with the obvious stuff. Financial records, vendor contracts, payroll information. Everything looked normal at first, the usual boring business documents that keep a company running. But then I noticed a folder buried 3 layers deep in a directory labeled Archive 2018, which was a weird place to put active files unless you were trying to hide them. The folder was called Hale Legacy Trusts, which sounded official and boring enough that most people would skip right over it, but I'd spent 8 years learning how to read between the lines of corporate bullshit, so I clicked it open. Inside were drafts, contracts that hadn't been finalized yet, documents with track changes and comment bubbles from lawyers I'd never heard of. There were shell company names that meant nothing to me: Meridian Holdings LLC, Coastal Development Partners, something called Venture Trust International that sounded like it was named by a random corporate name generator. And there were lists, beautiful incriminating lists, of asset transfers being earmarked from company accounts into something labeled Family Reserve, which is not a real accounting term and definitely not something that should be happening without board approval. My stomach did that thing where it drops into your shoes and then bounces back up into your throat. This wasn't just exclusion or office politics or hurt feelings. This was actual fraud. They were reorganizing company assets. Money that belonged to the business, money that employees and contractors and investors depended on, and funneling it into private family trusts. They were essentially embezzling from their own company, which takes a special kind of stupid or a special kind of arrogant, and I was betting on both. But it got better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. I found an email chain that someone had stupidly saved to the server instead of deleting like a normal criminal. It was between Evelyn and Ryan, with Olivia CC'd, and the subject line was Phase 3, Asset Protection. Phase 3. These people loved their phases. The emails were coded, obviously. They weren't complete idiots. But coded in that obvious way where anyone with half a brain could figure out what they were talking about. The reserve accounts are ready for transfer, Evelyn had written. Once the estate closes and we finalize the succession, we can move the majority of operational capital into the protected entities. Ryan's partnership structure should shield everything from external auditing. Ryan's partnership structure. I scrolled down and found an attachment, a PDF of a corporate filing for something called RBH Consulting Partners LLC. The R stood for Ryan. The B stood for. I had to check the filing details. Bradley, which was Ryan's middle name. And the H? That stood for Hale. Ryan had created a shell company using the family name, registered it in Delaware where corporate transparency goes to die, and was planning to funnel Hale and Son money through it. But wait, there's more. Because in the same email thread, buried about 15 messages deep where they probably thought nobody would ever read, was a joke. An actual joke about me. Evelyn had written, "What about the Marcus situation?" And Ryan had responded, "Don't worry. Clearing Marcus out is step one. Once he's gone, we can move freely. Leave the house to Olivia for her new life. Fresh start for everyone." Fresh start. Like I was mold they needed to scrub off the shower tiles. Olivia had responded with a single line. "Can't wait. Can't wait." 2 words that somehow hurt more than all the financial fraud combined. My wife, the woman I'd married 8 years ago, the woman I'd supported through her father's death, the woman who'd promised to love me in sickness and health and all that bullshit, couldn't wait to get rid of me so she could start her new life. With Ryan. In our house. Using money they'd stolen from the family business. I sat there in that dark office, the server humming next to me, and felt something crack open in my chest. Not my heart, that had broken a while ago. This was something else, something harder and angrier and more focused. This was the sound of whatever had been holding me back finally snapping in half. I printed everything. Every email, every contract draft, every shell company filing, every asset transfer list. The printer in the corner groaned to life like it was surprised anyone still used it, spitting out page after page of evidence. I made copies, multiple copies, because I'd watched enough crime shows to know that having only one set of evidence is how stupid people get caught. I saved everything to a USB drive, then saved it again to a different USB drive, then uploaded it all to a cloud storage account I created using an email address that had nothing to do with me. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd rather be paranoid and prepared than trusting and fucked. The financial records were damning enough, but it was the emails that really sealed their fate. You can argue about accounting errors and misunderstandings, but you can't argue your way out of an email where you literally say you're planning to steal company assets and remove an employee to cover your tracks. That's what lawyers call a slam dunk and what normal people call, "You're screwed." I found more the deeper I dug. Contracts with vendors who didn't exist, payments to offshore accounts that led nowhere, budget line items for projects that had never been built. They'd been at this for months, maybe longer, slowly bleeding the company dry while everyone smiled and clinked champagne glasses and talked about Edwin's legacy. They were burning down everything he built, and they were doing it in his name, using his death as cover for their greed. Around 3 in the morning, I finally closed everything down, cleared the server logs so nobody would know I'd been digging around, because I'd learned a few things about computer systems over the years, and covering your tracks is basically IT 101, and packed up my printed evidence in a banker's box I found in the supply closet. I walked past Phil on my way out, the box tucked under my arm, and he looked up long enough to say, "Working late, huh?" I smiled and said something about year-end reports, and he went back to his phone. I drove home as the sun was starting to come up, that weird gray light that makes everything look unreal and slightly sinister. The box sat in the passenger seat like a bomb, which in a way it was. I'd just stolen evidence of my wife and her family stealing from their own company. I had documentation of fraud, embezzlement, and a conspiracy to remove me from the business I'd helped build. I had emails where they laughed about destroying my life. And I had absolutely no idea what to do with it yet. But I knew someone who would. Several someones, actually. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in 8 years of being underestimated, it's that the quiet guy who does the boring work always knows people. Accountants. Lawyers. That friend from college who ended up at the SEC. The world is full of people who love nothing more than watching rich assholes get what's coming to them. I parked in my driveway, in the house I'd helped pay for, in the life I'd built that was apparently just a temporary inconvenience for Olivia's fresh start, and carried that box inside like it was made of glass. I hid it in the back of my closet, behind the winter coats and old shoes, where nobody would think to look. Then I took a shower, made coffee, and started making phone calls. Time to introduce my family to the concept of consequences. If you ever need to take down a criminal enterprise disguised as a family business, the first person you call is an accountant who hates rich people. Lucky for me, I knew the perfect one. Bev Martinez and I went back to college, back when we were both broke students eating ramen and complaining about our professors. She'd gone on to become a forensic accountant, which is basically a detective who uses spreadsheets instead of guns, and I'd gone on to marry into money and regret most of my life choices. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through birthday texts and occasional coffee meetups where she'd complain about her cases and I'd pretend my life was fine. I called her on a Friday morning, around 9, after Olivia had left for another one of her mysterious charity planning sessions. That probably involved Ryan and definitely didn't involve any actual charity. Bev answered on the third ring with her usual greeting. "Marcus, please tell me you're not calling to invite me to another one of your wife's insufferable dinner parties." "Better," I said. "I'm calling to ask if you want to help me catch some white-collar criminals who happen to be related to me by marriage." There was a pause. Then, "I'm listening." We met at a diner in Queens, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like it was made during the Nixon administration but nobody bothers you and the booths have enough privacy for conversations you don't want overheard. Bev showed up wearing her usual uniform, blazer, jeans, sneakers that had seen better days, and carrying a laptop bag that probably weighed more than she did. She slid into the booth across from me, ordered black coffee, and said, "Show me what you've got." I pulled out the USB drive and slid it across the table like we were in a spy movie. She plugged it into her laptop, spent about 30 seconds scanning the files, and then looked up at me with eyes that had gone from curious to extremely awake. "Holy shit, Marcus." "Yeah. No, I mean holy shit." She scrolled through more files, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard. This is shell company structuring, asset transfer schemes, potential money laundering, and oh wow, they actually wrote this stuff down in emails." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the laugh of someone who'd seen a lot of financial crimes and was still surprised by how stupid people could be. "Your family is either extremely confident or extremely dumb. I'm voting for both." Bev spent the next 20 minutes going through everything while I drank terrible coffee and tried not to look at the clock every 30 seconds. She made notes, muttered accounting terms I only half understood, and occasionally stopped to stare at her screen like she couldn't believe what she was reading. Finally, she closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression that was part impressed, part concerned, and part something else I couldn't quite identify. "This is federal," she said. "Like actual federal investigation territory. Wire fraud, tax evasion, probably RICO if we dig deep enough." These people aren't just stealing from their own company. They're setting up an entire infrastructure to hide assets, avoid taxes, and commit what's basically organized financial crime. She tapped her fingers on the table. "I know a guy. Actually, I know a woman. Agent Morales, FBI, White Collar Crime Division. She's good, she's thorough, and she loves cases like this." "FBI?" My stomach did a little flip. That seems like a lot. "Marcus, they're stealing millions. Maybe tens of millions, depending on how deep this goes. That's not small-time embezzlement. That's the kind of crime that gets people sent to actual prison, not country club minimum security with tennis courts." She leaned forward. "But here's the thing. You're going to need protection. If this goes public and they figure out you're the source, they're going to come after you with lawyers, investigators, maybe worse. Rich people don't like being exposed, and they really don't like going to jail. So what do I do?" You let me call Agent Morales. You get yourself a lawyer, not a family lawyer, not someone connected to the Hales, but a real attorney who specializes in whistleblower protection and white-collar defense. And you prepare for this to get ugly, because it will. She pulled out her phone. I'm also going to introduce you to someone else. Friend of mine, Aisha Khan. She's a lawyer with a boutique firm in Manhattan that handles exactly this kind of case. She's sharp, she's aggressive, and she's not impressed by old money or family names. You're very prepared for this conversation. Bev smiled. Marcus, I've been waiting 8 years for you to figure out your wife's family is trash. I'm just glad you finally came to your senses. Agent Morales turned out to be exactly what you'd expect from an FBI agent who spent her days chasing financial criminals. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and the kind of handshake that could crack walnuts. We met at her office in Federal Plaza, a building that looked like every government building ever made, gray, imposing, and full of people who looked tired and caffeinated in equal measure. She sat behind a desk that was surprisingly organized for someone who dealt with complex financial crimes, and she listened to my story without interrupting, which I appreciated because I was nervous enough to word vomit all over her office if given the chance. When I finished, she asked exactly 3 questions. Do you have the original files? Yes. Can you provide access to the company server? Also yes. Are you willing to testify if this goes to trial? I hesitated on that one, because testifying against your wife's family in federal court is the kind of thing that makes Thanksgiving dinner really awkward forever. But then I remembered the part where they called me dead weight and planned to steal everything and leave me with nothing, so I said yes to that too. Agent Morales smiled. A real smile, not the professional kind, and said, Good. Give me 48 hours to review everything with my team. If this is as solid as it looks, we'll open an investigation and move fast. White-collar criminals tend to run when they see the walls closing in, so speed matters. She stood up, which I took as my cue to leave, but then she said something that stuck with me. Mr. Hale, people like your wife's family? They think the rules don't apply to them. They think money buys immunity. I really enjoy proving them wrong. I liked her immediately. Aisha Khan's office was in Midtown, one of those converted brownstones that tries to look friendly and approachable but charges $500 an hour. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and glasses that she kept pushing up her nose while she read through the documents I'd brought. Her office walls were covered in framed articles about cases she'd won, which was either impressive or intimidating or both. This is good, she said after what felt like an hour of silence. This is really good. They documented everything, which makes my job significantly easier. She looked up at me over her glasses. Here's what's going to happen. Agent Morales will handle the criminal investigation. I'm going to handle the civil side. Protecting your interests in the company, making sure you're not dragged down with them when charges get filed, and positioning you for when the board inevitably panics and starts looking for someone to blame. They're going to blame me? They're going to try. You're the convenient scapegoat, the son-in-law, the operations guy, the person who had access to everything. When rich people get caught, their first instinct is to point fingers at someone else. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably terrified opposing counsel. But we're going to make that very difficult for them. We're going to establish a timeline showing you discovered the fraud, reported it to authorities, and cooperated fully. You're not the criminal here, you're the whistleblower. Big difference, legally and publicly. What about Olivia? I asked, because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the red dress and the emails about my removal, she was still my wife. Technically. Aisha's expression softened, just slightly. That's up to you, Marcus. If she's complicit, and based on these emails she is, then she's going to face charges. You can't protect her from that. But you can decide whether you want to try to minimize her involvement, or let her face the full consequences. She paused. My professional advice? Let her face the consequences. My personal opinion? These people treated you like garbage for years. You don't owe them anything. We spent the next 3 hours going over strategy, what I could and couldn't say, what documents I needed to preserve, how to act normal around the family while the investigation proceeded. Aisha had a whole playbook for this kind of thing, which made sense given the articles on her wall. She talked about asset freezes and corporate governance, and discovery motions with the kind of enthusiasm most people reserve for talking about their favorite TV shows. By the time I left her office, it was dark outside and my brain felt like it had been through a blender, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Not the naive kind that thinks everything will work out fine, but the practical kind that comes from having competent people on your side who actually know what they're doing. I had Bev, who could read financial crimes like most people read grocery lists. I had Agent Morales, who seemed to enjoy destroying white-collar criminals as a hobby. And I had Aisha, who looked at my case like a chess game she was already 3 moves ahead in. The Hales thought they were so smart, so untouchable, so protected by money and status and family name. They thought I was just going to disappear quietly, take my bare minimum severance, and fade into obscurity. They were about to learn that the quiet guy who does the boring work, that guy has friends, and spreadsheets, and a really good memory for birthdays and dog names. The thing about building a case against your own family is that it requires the kind of cold-blooded patience usually reserved for serial killers and professional poker players. You have to smile at breakfast while mentally cataloging evidence. You have to make small talk about the weather while your lawyer drafts immunity agreements. You have to act like everything is fine when everything is very much not fine, and you have to do it convincingly enough that nobody suspects you're about to blow up their entire world. I got really good at it. Disturbingly good, actually. Aisha and Agent Morales worked together like a well-oiled machine, the kind of partnership that comes from mutual respect and a shared love of destroying bad people. They moved fast, faster than I expected, which Aisha explained was necessary because financial criminals are like cockroaches. They scatter when you turn on the lights, and we need to freeze their assets before they move everything offshore. Poetic and accurate, which pretty much summed up Aisha's entire personality. The FBI needed proof that Olivia, Evelyn, and Ryan weren't just thinking about committing fraud. They needed evidence that they'd actually done it, that money had moved, that assets had been transferred, that the crime was real and ongoing and prosecutable. Lucky for them, the Hales had been extremely thorough in their documentation, probably because they never imagined anyone would actually look at their books with hostile intent. They treated the company's server like their personal diary, writing down every illegal thought and action like they were keeping a scrapbook of their own criminal enterprise. Agent Morales brought in a forensic team, actual FBI accountants who made Bev look casual by comparison, and they spent a week diving into the company's financial records like archaeologists excavating a particularly corrupt ancient civilization. What they found was even better than what I'd initially discovered. Not only were the Hales funneling money into shell companies and family trusts, they were also inflating construction costs, paying phantom vendors, and writing off personal expenses as business costs. Evelyn had apparently billed the company for a trip to Paris that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with buying designer handbags. Ryan had been collecting consulting fees while also taking kickbacks from vendors he'd recommended. And Olivia, sweet, ambitious Olivia, had signed off on all of it as acting CFO, a position she'd given herself after her father died without bothering to consult the board. "This is the kind of stupid that makes my job easy," Agent Morales said during one of our meetings, which took place in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and government-issue cleaning products. They didn't even try to hide it. It's like they thought being rich meant they were immune to consequences. They probably did think that. I said, "Yeah, well, they're about to get a very expensive education in reality. The government wanted to secure the assets first, freeze the accounts, lock down the shell companies, make sure the Hales couldn't move their money to the Cayman Islands or Switzerland or wherever rich people hide their stolen cash. Then they wanted to go public with arrests, charges, the whole dramatic production that turns white-collar criminals into headlines. I was fine with all of that. More than fine, actually. I wanted the spectacle. I wanted the public humiliation. I wanted everyone who'd ever looked down on me at a Hale family event to see the news and realize they'd been celebrating criminals. But I also wanted protection, because I wasn't naive enough to think this would end well for me socially or professionally. The Hales had connections, lawyers, politicians, business associates who owed them favors. Once they figured out I was the one who'd turned them in, they'd come after me with everything they had. Aisha assured me this was normal and expected. They'll try to paint you as a disgruntled employee, she explained, spinning her pen between her fingers like she was conducting an orchestra. They'll say you were fired for incompetence, or that you were stealing and got caught, or that you fabricated evidence because you're bitter about the divorce. Which, by the way, we should probably start filing for, just to get ahead of that narrative. Divorce. The word felt heavy in my mouth, even though the marriage had been dead longer than it had been alive. Yeah. Okay. Good. I'll have papers drawn up. We'll file on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct, which are both provable and make you look sympathetic. She made a note on her legal pad. We'll also need to secure your interests in the company. You've been there 8 years, you have equity, you have claims to benefits and severance. We need to make sure all of that is legally protected before the company implodes. Will it implode? Aisha looked at me like I just asked if water was wet. Marcus, the CEO, the acting CFO, and a major consultant are all about to be arrested for fraud. The company will absolutely implode. Best case scenario, the board brings in crisis management and tries to salvage what's left. Worst case, bankruptcy and dissolution. Either way, you want to be positioned as the good guy who tried to stop it, not the guy who went down with the ship. The immunity deal took 2 weeks to negotiate. Aisha and Agent Morales went back and forth with the U.S. Attorney's Office like they were haggling at a flea market, arguing over language and scope and conditions until I wanted to scream. But the final agreement was solid, full immunity for any unintentional involvement in the fraud. Because I'd signed some documents as part of my operations role that technically made me part of the paper trail, protection from civil liability, and a cooperation agreement that required me to testify if the case went to trial. I signed it in Agent Morales' office on a Tuesday afternoon, my hand steadier than I expected. The pen was government issue, cheap and plastic, but signing that document felt more significant than signing my marriage license had 8 years ago. This was me choosing a side. This was me saying, "Fuck you," to a family that had never really wanted me anyway. This was me deciding that being right was more important than being polite. "Welcome to the team," Agent Morales said, shaking my hand after I signed. "From here on out, everything you see and hear is potential evidence. Keep notes, keep records, and for God's sake, don't tell anyone what's coming. The element of surprise is our biggest advantage." So I became a spy in my own life. I went to family dinners and smiled while Evelyn talked about the company's exciting new direction. I nodded when Ryan bragged about some development project that probably only existed in his imagination and on fraudulent invoices. I kissed Olivia goodbye when she left for her meetings, and pretended I didn't know she was meeting Ryan at some apartment downtown that the company was paying for through a shell vendor account labeled Executive Housing. I practiced my poker face in the bathroom mirror. Concerned but not suspicious, hurt but not angry, confused but not hostile. I needed to look like a man who suspected something was wrong but didn't know what, who felt left out but wasn't doing anything about it. It was method acting for the most important performance of my life, and the audience was a group of criminals who thought I was too stupid to notice their crimes. The hardest part was acting normal around Olivia. She'd started being nice to me again, which was somehow worse than the neglect. She'd ask about my day, touch my arm during conversations, suggest we have dinner together, all while planning to steal my share of the company and kick me out of our house. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting. I'd lie in bed next to her at night, listening to her breathe, wondering how someone could betray you so completely while sleeping so peacefully. Bev called it sociopathic compartmentalization over coffee one morning. We'd started meeting weekly, ostensibly so she could update me on the forensic accounting, but really so I'd have someone to talk to who wasn't a lawyer or an FBI agent. People like Olivia and Evelyn, she said, dumping 3 sugars into her coffee. They don't see other people as real. We're just objects, resources to be used or obstacles to be removed. That's how they can smile at you over breakfast and plan your destruction before lunch. You're not a person to them, you're a problem to be solved. That's deeply comforting, thank you. Hey, I'm an accountant, not a therapist. You want comfort, get a dog. You want the truth, you came to the right place. The truth was that I was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of smiling, tired of playing this role while waiting for the hammer to drop. But Aisha kept reminding me that patience was the weapon, that every day we waited was another day for the FBI to build an airtight case, another day for the Hales to incriminate themselves further, another day closer to the moment when everything would collapse and I'd be standing safely outside the blast radius. Think of it like this, she said during one of our strategy sessions. They're building a house of cards, and you're counting every card they add. When it falls, and it will fall, you want to make sure it falls on them, not you. So I counted cards. I took notes. I documented conversations. I forwarded suspicious emails to my personal account. I made copies of copies of copies. And I waited. The will reading was scheduled for a Friday in November, 6 months after Edwin's death, which was apparently how long it took to settle an estate when you were rich and complicated. Aisha saw it as the perfect opportunity, the moment when the Hales would be most confident, most vulnerable, most convinced of their victory. Agent Morales agreed. They wanted me at that will reading, wanted me to be present when the trap was sprung, wanted me to see their faces when they realized the quiet guy in the corner had been the one holding all the cards. You're going to need to keep it together, Aisha warned me. No gloating, no smirking, no I told you so. You're the victim here, remember? You're shocked, you're hurt, you're confused about why your family would do this. That's the narrative. I practiced shocked and hurt in the mirror. I practiced confused. I practiced every expression except the one I actually felt, which was something between vindicated and absolutely fucking furious. The night before the will reading, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Olivia breathe next to me, thinking about how tomorrow would be the last day of our marriage in any meaningful sense. Tomorrow the FBI would freeze the assets. Tomorrow Agent Morales would read my letter. Tomorrow everyone would know. I thought about popcorn. I actually thought about bringing popcorn to the will reading, which Aisha had explicitly forbidden but which still seemed like a great idea. In my head I practiced my speech, the one I'd never get to give but that felt good to imagine anyway. Remember when you called me dead weight? Remember when you planned my life's destruction over champagne? How's that working out for you? But I didn't need a speech. I had something better. I had evidence, immunity, and the full weight of the federal government backing me up. I had patience, preparation, and a really good lawyer. And tomorrow, I had a will reading to attend. I woke up that Friday morning feeling like an actor on opening night, terrified, excited, and weirdly calm all at once. Olivia was already up, probably had been for hours based on the amount of effort she'd put into her appearance. She wore a black Armani dress that probably cost more than a used car, pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, and enough designer perfume to choke a small horse. She looked like she was going to accept an award, not read her dead father's will. Then again, for her, maybe it was the same thing. You ready? She asked, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror for the 1000th time. Her voice had that bright, fake quality that people use when they're trying to sound casual about something that's actually very important to them. As I'll ever be, I said, which was possibly the most honest thing I'd said to her in months. We drove separately. She insisted on taking her BMW because apparently arriving together would have been too much like actual marriage, so I had 45 minutes alone in my car to run through everything one more time. Aisha had coached me extensively on how to act, surprised but not shocked, concerned but not suspicious, hurt but not angry. You're a man who trusted his family and is about to discover he shouldn't have, she'd said. That's your character. Stay in character. I checked my phone at a red light. 3 messages from Aisha. Remember, you know nothing about the investigation yet. Let Grant read the letter. Don't speak unless directly asked. You've got this. Call me after. 1 message from Agent Morales. Team is in position. Stay calm. And 1 from Bev that just said, go get 'em, Tiger. Followed by a bunch of tiger emojis, because Bev thought she was hilarious. The law office of Grant and Associates occupied the top floor of a building in Midtown that screamed old money so loud you could hear it from the street. All dark wood paneling, leather furniture, and oil paintings of dead white guys who probably made their fortunes doing questionable things in the 1800s. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s with a helmet of gray hair and reading glasses on a pearl chain, directed me to the conference room with a smile that suggested she'd seen 1,000 family dramas play out in this building and mine was just another Friday afternoon. I arrived early, because showing up late would have suggested I wasn't taking this seriously, and I needed to seem like the good son-in-law who respected the process even if everyone else was planning to screw him over. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect. Enormous table made of wood that probably came from a tree older than America. Uncomfortable chairs that cost more than they were worth, silk curtains that blocked out most of the natural light, and a table set with tea service like we were in a British period drama. Mr. Grant was already there, arranging documents on the table with the precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. He was maybe 70, with white hair combed back from his forehead and reading glasses that he wore on the tip of his nose like a stern librarian. He had that Oxford professor vibe. The kind of guy who probably owned first editions of books you'd never heard of and drank whiskey that was older than your parents. Marcus, he said, shaking my hand. Early as always. That's a rare quality these days. Seemed like the respectful thing to do, I said, which was true and also the exact kind of thing a guy who didn't know his family was committing crimes would say. Olivia floated in next, bringing with her a cloud of perfume and entitlement. She kissed Mr. Grant on both cheeks, because apparently we were French now, and took a seat at the head of the table like she already owned the place. Ryan arrived 30 seconds later, because of course he couldn't let her enter a room without him for longer than it took to park a car. He wore another one of those suits that tried too hard, this one charcoal gray with a tie that had probably been described as bold by whatever salesman convinced him to buy it. He shook Mr. Grant's hand with the kind of firm grip that guys like him think conveys confidence but really just conveys. I read a book about business once. Ryan, Mr. Grant said neutrally, because even lawyers have standards about who they pretend to like. Evelyn arrived last, making an entrance because that's what Evelyn did. She wore black Chanel, because God forbid she repeat an outfit, even to her own husband's were reading, and those same pearls that probably cost more than a semester of college. She surveyed the room like a queen inspecting her kingdom, her eyes passing over me with about as much interest as you'd give a piece of furniture. She took her seat at the opposite end of the table from Olivia, and suddenly we were arranged like some kind of corporate Last Supper, with me cast as Judas except in this version I was the only one telling the truth. Mr. Grant cleared his throat, that official lawyer throat clear that means, "Shut up, we're starting now," and pulled out a sealed envelope from his briefcase. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy paper, with Edwin's name printed on the front in elegant script. He broke the seal with a letter opener that probably cost more than my first car, unfolded the document inside, and began reading in that practiced monotone that lawyers use when delivering news that's going to make someone very happy and someone else very upset. Edwin's will was straightforward, at least at first. Property in the Hamptons to Evelyn. The apartment in Manhattan to Olivia. Charitable donations to various organizations that probably gave him tax breaks when he was alive. And then the big one. As for Hale and Son Developments, I leave the company in trust to those who have proven themselves true collaborators in both spirit and deed, to be determined by the board based on contributions to the company's success and integrity. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes bright. Ryan shifted in his chair, trying not to smile too obviously. Evelyn's mouth curved into what might have been satisfaction or indigestion. With her it was hard to tell. They thought true collaborators meant them. They thought this was their moment of victory, the official confirmation that they'd won and I'd lost. Mr. Grant set the will aside carefully, folding it like it was made of glass. Then he reached into his briefcase again and pulled out another envelope. This one was different, plain white, modern, with my name printed on the front in standard office printer font. "Before we conclude," he said, and something in his voice changed, got quieter and more careful. "There is a letter that was submitted to this office 3 weeks ago by Marcus Hale. Per the instructions accompanying it, I am required to read it aloud during this proceeding." The room went still. You know that moment in movies when everything freezes and the music stops? It was like that, except real, and the only sound was the air conditioning and Evelyn's pearl necklace making a tiny clicking noise as she shifted in her chair. Mr. Grant opened my envelope, unfolded the letter, 3 pages, single-spaced, every word chosen carefully with Aisha's help, and began to scan it. I watched his eyes move across the text, watched his expression shift from professional neutrality to something that looked a lot like surprise, then interest, then, and this was the part I'll remember forever, amusement. His mouth twitched. Then it curved. Then he actually laughed, not a polite chuckle but a real, genuine, from-the-belly laugh that echoed off the wood paneling and expensive art. "Oh," he said quietly, still smiling, still looking at my letter like it was the most entertaining thing he'd read all year. "Oh my!" Olivia's smile faltered like a candle in wind. Ryan's jaw tightened, muscles working under skin that had suddenly gone a shade paler. Evelyn's hand went to her pearls, that unconscious gesture people make when they're nervous and trying not to show it. Her perfectly composed face developed a tiny crack, just around the eyes, where fear was starting to leak through the foundation. Mr. Grant looked up from the letter, his eyes moving from Evelyn to Ryan to Olivia, and for a second I saw something in his expression that looked a lot like satisfaction. He'd been Edwin's lawyer for 30 years. He'd probably known the family was rotten long before I figured it out. And now he got to be the one who delivered the news that their corruption had consequences. "This letter," he began, adjusting his reading glasses, "submitted by Marcus Hale and accompanied by substantial documentation, outlines evidence of financial misconduct within Hale and Son Developments." He cleared his throat again, but this time it wasn't the official lawyer sound. It was the sound of someone trying not to laugh while delivering devastating news. The letter states, and I quote, "Enclosed you will find communications, financial records, and corporate documents proving an orchestrated plan to divert company assets, establish fraudulent vendor relationships, create shell entities for the purpose of tax evasion and embezzlement, and remove an employee, specifically myself, for personal gain rather than legitimate business purposes." Ryan stood up. Sat back down. Stood up again. His face had gone from pale to red, that splotchy color people get when they're angry and panicking simultaneously. Olivia's mouth opened but no sound came out, like someone had pressed her mute button. Evelyn remained perfectly still, but her hand on those pearls was trembling now, actually visible shaking that no amount of breeding or finishing school could hide. Mr. Grant continued reading, and with every sentence, I watched my former family crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. He read the part about the shell companies, Ryan's name appearing as a concealed partner in RBH Consulting Partners LLC. He read the part about asset transfers, Evelyn's instructions to move operational capital into family trusts without board approval. He read the email excerpts, the ones where they joked about removing me, where Ryan called me dead weight, where Olivia wrote, "Can't wait," about starting her new life without me. He read the financial analysis Bev had prepared, showing exactly how much money had been stolen, exactly where it had gone, exactly how many laws had been broken. By the time he finished, the room felt like a tomb. Silent. Airless. Heavy with the weight of consequences about to crush everyone except me. Mr. Grant set the letter down carefully, removed his reading glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. When he looked up, his expression was grave but his eyes were still amused, like he was trying to be professional but couldn't quite hide his enjoyment of the situation. "This is," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "an extremely serious matter. The documentation provided appears credible and extensive." He looked directly at Evelyn. "Mrs. Hale, I believe you should contact your attorney immediately." Then he pulled out his phone, his personal phone, not the office one, and made a call that I knew was coming but that still made my heart rate spike. "Yes, this is Harrison Grant. I need to speak with Agent Morales, FBI White Collar Crime Division." "Yes, I'll hold." Olivia found her voice first, and it came out strangled and desperate. "Marcus, what is this? What did you do?" I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, no regret. Just a calm, clear certainty that I'd done exactly the right thing. "I found out what you were doing," I said quietly. "And I reported it. That's all." "You—" Ryan started, lunging toward me, but Mr. Grant held up one hand. "I would strongly advise everyone to remain seated and silent," he said, his voice carrying actual authority now. "Agent Morales is on her way." The sound of handcuffs is surprisingly loud in a quiet room. Agent Morales arrived faster than I expected, which meant she'd probably been waiting in a coffee shop around the corner, killing time until Mr. Grant made the call. She walked into that conference room like she owned it, all business in her dark suit and sensible shoes, flanked by two other agents who looked like they lifted weights for fun and ate protein bars for every meal. Behind them came more people, forensic accountants carrying laptops, a guy with a badge that said, "Asset Forfeiture," and someone I recognized from Aisha's firm who was probably there to make sure I didn't accidentally incriminate myself by breathing wrong. "Good afternoon," Agent Morales said, and her voice had that calm, professional quality that somehow made everything more terrifying. "I'm Special Agent Morales, FBI. We have warrants to seize financial records and electronic devices related to an ongoing investigation into Hale and Son developments." She held up a folder thick with official-looking documents. "We also have warrants for the arrest of Evelyn Hale, Olivia Hale, and Ryan Bradley on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." The room exploded like someone had thrown a grenade made of panic and disbelief. Olivia made a sound that might have been a word or might have been her soul trying to escape through her throat. Ryan stood up so fast his chair tipped backward and crashed into the expensive credenza behind him. Evelyn remained seated, but her face had gone the color of old newspaper, that grayish-white that means the blood has evacuated the premises and taken all hope with it. "This is ridiculous," Ryan said, his voice cracking on the second syllable. We haven't done anything wrong. This is a family matter, this is." "Sir, I'm going to need you to be quiet," Agent Morales said, not unkindly but also not negotiably. She nodded to one of the protein bar guys, who stepped forward with actual handcuffs dangling from his belt like a medieval jailer. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you exercise it." Evelyn found her voice, and when she spoke it had lost all that practiced elegance, all that finishing school polish. What came out was raw and sharp and desperate. "This is my son-in-law's doing. He's mentally unstable, he's been erratic, She pointed at me with a trembling finger. "He's fabricating evidence because he's angry about being removed from the company. This is revenge, this is—" "Mrs. Hale," Mr. Grant interrupted, and his voice cut through her panic like a knife through butter. "I have reviewed the evidence Mr. Marcus Hale submitted. I have also verified portions of it against the company's official records, which, as a state executor, I have access to. The documentation is authentic. The email communications are authentic. The financial transfers are authentic." He paused, letting that sink in. "Your son-in-law didn't fabricate anything. You documented your own crimes." That shut her up, but only for about 3 seconds. Then she tried a different tactic, her voice shifting to something that might have been tears or might have been fury or might have been both. "Edwin would never have wanted this. His own family, arrested like common criminals, because of. She couldn't even say my name, just gestured at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Ma'am, Agent Morales said, and now her voice had an edge. Edwin Hale's company was being systematically looted by his widow and daughter. I don't think he'd be thrilled about that either. She motioned to the agents. Let's proceed. Watching someone get arrested is weird. It happens faster than you'd think but also feels like it takes forever, like time does that stretchy thing where seconds become minutes and minutes become hours. The agent approached Evelyn first, probably because she was the matriarch, the queen bee, the one who'd orchestrated most of this mess. She stood up finally, her legs unsteady, and held out her wrists like she was offering them for sacrifice. The handcuffs clicked into place. That distinctive ratcheting sound that means freedom is over and consequences have arrived. This is unnecessary, she said, but her voice had no strength left in it. We'll cooperate, we'll come voluntarily, there's no need for. Standard procedure, ma'am. The agent was polite but immovable. He read her rights from a little card he pulled from his pocket, and listening to the Miranda warning being delivered to my mother-in-law in a lawyer's conference room had a surreal quality that my brain couldn't quite process. This was really happening. After months of planning, weeks of preparation, days of anxiety, this was actually, genuinely, no going back happening. Ryan was next. He tried to run, actually tried to bolt for the door like this was a movie and he was the action hero who escapes in the third act. He made it about 4 steps before Protein Bar Agent number 2 caught him by the arm and spun him around with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Ryan struggled for maybe half a second before realizing that fighting an FBI agent was a spectacularly bad idea that would only add, resisting arrest, to his growing list of charges. You're making a mistake, he said, and his voice had gone high and desperate. All that fake confidence evaporated like morning dew in the desert. I'm a consultant, I was just following Mrs. Hale's instructions, I didn't know. Save it for your lawyer, the agent said, clicking the cuffs into place. You have the right to remain silent. Means you should probably stop talking now. That left Olivia. My wife. The woman I'd married 8 years ago in the Hamptons with promises of forever and happiness, and all those other lies people tell each other when they're young and stupid and convinced that love is enough. She looked at me across that conference table, her perfectly made-up face starting to crack, mascara threatening to run, and said my name like it was a question and an accusation and a prayer all at once. Marcus. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? Sorry your criminal conspiracy got discovered? Sorry you have to face consequences for your actions? Sorry I stopped letting you treat me like garbage? Marcus, please. Her voice broke. We can fix this. We can talk to them, we can explain, we can. Mrs. Hale, Agent Morales said, and her tone had softened just slightly, maybe because even FBI agents feel weird about arresting someone's wife in front of them. You need to come with us now. Olivia stood up, and her legs wobbled like a newborn deer. She reached out toward me, one hand extended like I was supposed to grab it, like I was supposed to save her from this. We're married, she said, and tears were actually running down her face now, cutting tracks through her foundation. You're my husband. We're supposed to. We're supposed to a lot of things, I said quietly. Most of which you forgot about when you started sleeping with Ryan and planning to steal everything my father-in-law built. She flinched like I'd hit her. The agent approached her with handcuffs, and she held out her wrists automatically, muscle memory from too many years of doing what she was told by authority figures. The metal clicked shut around her wrists, Cartier bracelets replaced by federal restraints, and something in her face just collapsed. All the beauty, all the confidence, all the entitlement that had made her so attractive 8 years ago just fell away, and what was left was a scared woman in an expensive dress who'd made spectacularly bad choices and was about to spend the next several years paying for them. I can't believe you did this, she whispered. I can't believe you'd destroy your own family. That actually made me laugh, not a nice laugh, but a bitter, exhausted sound that came from somewhere deep in my chest where I'd been storing 8 years of accumulated hurt. I didn't destroy anything, Olivia. You did that all by yourself. I just made sure everyone else got to see it. Agent Morales and her team started herding them toward the door, a little parade of handcuffed criminals in designer clothes. Other agents were already confiscating phones, seizing the laptops that Ryan and Olivia had brought, boxing up documents from Mr. Grant's table. The asset forfeiture guy was on his phone, probably already freezing bank accounts and putting holds on properties. The machinery of federal law enforcement was in motion, and nothing was going to stop it now. Evelyn paused at the door, turned back to look at me with eyes that burned with something between hatred and disbelief. "You were nothing," she said, her voice venomous even in handcuffs. "Ain't nobody from nowhere who got lucky when my daughter took pity on you. And this is how you repay us? By destroying everything Edwin built?" I met her eyes and felt absolutely nothing but a cold, satisfied certainty. "Edwin built a company. You were tearing it apart and selling the pieces. I saved it. You're welcome." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. But Agent Morales was already guiding her out the door, and whatever cutting response she'd been preparing died unspoken. I watched them leave, Evelyn with her head high despite the handcuffs, trying to maintain dignity in the face of complete humiliation, Ryan stumbling and pale, looking like he might throw up or pass out or both, and Olivia, who turned back one last time at the doorway, her eyes meeting mine with an expression I couldn't read and didn't particularly want to. Then they were gone, and the conference room was suddenly very quiet except for the remaining agents cataloging evidence and Mr. Grant shuffling papers like this was just another Friday afternoon at the office. He looked at me over his reading glasses, and his expression was complicated, part impressed, part concerned, part something that might have been respect. "That," he said slowly, "was the most thorough takedown of a client family I've witnessed in 40 years of practice." "They made it easy," I said. "Wrote everything down like they were keeping a diary." "Indeed." He organized his documents into neat piles, that compulsive lawyer habit. "Marcus, I knew Edwin for 3 decades. He was my friend before he was my client. And I think—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think he would have approved of what you did here today. Not the arrests, perhaps, but the honesty. The refusal to let corruption disguise itself as family loyalty." He extended his hand. "You're a better man than they deserved." I shook his hand, and for the first time in hours, I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of tension I'd been carrying since this whole thing started. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. Harrison, please. I suspect we'll be working together quite a bit in the coming months." He smiled, a real smile this time. "The board will need someone to help stabilize the company. Someone with institutional knowledge, integrity, and a very good reason to make sure the Hales crimes don't destroy what Edwin built." "You offering me a job, Harrison? I'm suggesting that when the dust settles, you might find yourself with more leverage than you think. Use it wisely." I left the law office in a daze, walked out into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright and too normal for a day when I just watched my wife get arrested. My phone buzzed, Aisha, asking how it went. Bev, demanding details. Agent Morales, requesting I come by the field office Monday to give a formal statement. I ignored them all and just stood there on the sidewalk, watching normal people do normal things, and thought about how my life had just completely, irrevocably changed. Handcuffs are loud in quiet rooms. But so is freedom. They were arrested. Asset freezes began before they'd even been processed downtown. The company board went into emergency mode. Conference calls at midnight, crisis management consultants charging obscene hourly rates, lawyers everywhere like sharks smelling blood. My life, the one that had been quietly ebbing away like a slow leak in a tire, returned like a tide. I walked out of that drawing room a man who'd been underestimated and then underestimated no more. People whispered. The press sniffed around like bloodhounds. Friends I didn't know I had texted their support. Olivia called my name once when they led Ryan away, her voice cracking like bad violin strings hitting the wrong note. Evelyn didn't look at me. She looked smaller than her pearls, diminished somehow, like being handcuffed had physically shrunk her. Aisha negotiated my legal standing. Partial control over company operations pending investigation, fair severance for the years I'd been wronged, and the paperwork to start again. I didn't want revenge so much as a life, quiet, dignified mine. Humor helped. I joked about hiring a better dry cleaner. I made speeches about loyalty that included lines like, "Never bet against someone who knows where the spreadsheets hide." The last thing I remember from that morning is Mr. Grant whispering, "You wrote it well, Marcus. Very, very well." Outside, the sky looked ordinary. I liked ordinary. It meant new mornings.